Hello, I'm Jeff Morgan. You are listening to The Unchosen Road, the first book in the Earthlings of Veilwyn series. This is an authorized recording. If you are interested in following this story, please like and subscribe. To see a full list of my books, visit Amazon Kindle. Thank you and enjoy.
Chapter 5. The First Threshold. Morning thinned the fog to a pale veil that returned the world in cautious pieces. The dirt road stretched ahead like quiet intention, two faint ruts stitched with grass, damp with dew that darkened the soil. Pines rose on either side, their crowns combing the light into narrow threads of green. Somewhere ahead a stream worked at its stones with patient sound. Ethan lifted the cloak at his throat and let it fall again, its weight both anchor and reminder. The dagger's hilt warmed under his palm, as though it had remembered his hand during the night. He walked, not with the stumbling panic that had torn him through the forest, nor with the clutching breath of something pursued, but with the measured rhythm of a man learning to exist again in daylight. His steps found pattern. Gravel whispered beneath his feet. The road accepted him without judgment. Air moved between the trees with the scent of sap and wet bark. A sweeter note drifted through it, something floral he could not name, light as a forgotten promise. It was not the sour of the mist, and that absence alone felt like a gift. He drew the breath deeper and let it settle. The cold of dawn lifted from his bones by slow degrees. Birdsong began, strange and bright. A crisp, three-note whistle rose from deep in the branches, followed by a scatter of clicks and trills like pebbles poured into metal. Another voice answered in a trembling assent that bent beyond his hearing, a silver thread that left a pulse behind his eyes. He could not see them, only flickers of color between leaves, but their presence was watchful in a way that soothed rather than threatened. The forest had eyes again, but not the ones that had followed him through the dark. He paused where the light opened over a small patch of fern. Dew beaded the fronds like a constellation drawn near the ground. He crouched, touched the soil at the road's edge. Cold, firm, untroubled. No cart marks, only faint hoofprints and the scatter of small paws, perhaps rabbit. The act of reading the earth steadied him. Choices would come later. For now, the world offered simple information, and he could answer with simple trust. Forward. A ribbon of air drifted from the stream, cool against his cheeks. The cloak stirred. The dagger brushed his hip. He rested his hand on the hilt, not from fear, but from the quiet comfort of knowing he could draw it if he must. That knowledge spread through him like warmth. He spoke once, testing whether his voice still belonged to the morning. Still here. The words went nowhere. They did not need to. The pines gave way to birch and oak, their bark pale and peeling in soft curls that showed new skin beneath. Light slipped through the leaves in coins that rolled across the road. The forest no longer felt like a snare, but a presence keeping pace beside him. He remembered the circles watching stones, the way the mist had pressed close. This was another kind of witness. This was observation without hunger. The signs of life grew richer the farther he walked. Spiderwebs ran between stems in mirrored spirals, two centers sharing a single thread. Ants crossed the path in a narrow procession, each carrying a shard that flashed like mica. A dragonfly hovered over the ditch and turned 4 times, tracing a square before vanishing into green. The pattern of it all brushed at meaning just beyond comprehension, a grammar the body recognized before the mind could name. The birds shifted their song again, a low chuckle from the brush, then a descending whistle that vanished into silence. Ethan glanced upward and caught an amber flicker between trunks, a shape no larger than his hand, tail ribbon smooth. It paused on a branch, tilted its head, and regarded him with a bright, patient curiosity. He felt recorded, not as trespasser but as traveler, his presence acknowledged, written somewhere in the forest's quiet ledger. Then the creature folded into bark and was gone. He kept walking. The road climbed to a shallow rise, and he let the incline lengthen his breath. The sun lifted a finger higher. Shadows drew shorter. The colors around him shifted from bruised green to olive and faint gold. He loosened the cloak at his neck and let the warmth touch the hollow of his throat. For the first time since waking in the inn, since finding the coins and the absence beside the bed, he felt a sense of shape return. Not the man from before the trail, not the one who had knelt naked in the circle. Someone in between, learning the new alphabet of himself one sound at a time. The road made space for that person. He felt the same space opening inside him. At a place where the road met the stream, he knelt and cupped water in both hands. It tasted of stone and cedar, bright and clean. He drank until fullness lifted a warning in his stomach, then let the rest run cold over his wrists. He filled the water skin and looped it beneath the cloak. A leaf drifted past, turned once and caught on a reed with a sound like a quiet breath. He thought of the boat from his dream, the silent oars-cutting memory from water. The thought rose and passed. Dreams could wait. The day required attention. The forest ahead grew lighter. The undergrowth thinned to islands of fern and pale flowers shaped like open hands. Bees moved among them, their tone low and resonant, a hum that worked through his ribs and steadied his pulse. Without meaning to, he matched his stride to the rhythm. It grounded him more than the blade at his side. No fear came for a long time. Vigilance. Yes, the road taught that, but not fear. He watched the edges, noted where animals had passed, felt the sun shift on his neck. He did not look back. He did not have to. At a stand of alder, the path widened into a clearing where the light fell clean. Birds spoke to one another in the canopy, short phrases of mourning. Behind him, the stream gathered strength, its murmur deepening. Farther off, beyond the next turn, came a hollow knock, wood against wood, then another, then silence. He waited. The stillness that followed held nothing of threat. The air did not thicken, the skin on his arms did not rise. Whatever had made the sound had no interest in him. He let the breath go slowly and felt the last tension slide from his shoulders. He stepped into the bend and went on. The forest shifted again, not in danger but in tone, a quiet easing that told him he had crossed an invisible seam. Sunlight reached through the branches in long bars. Birdsong scattered into light chatter. He could not name the change, but he felt it with absolute clarity, the subtle recognition of being allowed through. The world had opened its threshold. He carried that permission forward, one measured step at a time. The road narrowed to a ribbon where alder and hazel leaned close. Shade cooled the dust. Ethan softened his steps and kept to the center where the roots did not reach. He had already learned that the edges belonged to other feet than his. A faint patter stirred the leaves to his left, followed by a quick scrape, then silence. He paused. The air carried the scent of damp clay and crushed nettle. Something small burst from the brush and streaked across the ruts. A rat, thin and dark, body rippling like poured ink. It ran with the blind precision of a creature whose whole faith was in forward motion. It vanished into the grass on the far side with a flick of its tail. The hunter came next. It stepped from the hedge with the easy arrogance of something that had never been told no. No taller than a child's knee, its skin was the color of wet peat, gleaming faintly. Hair tufted in short spines along its back. The head was all edges and grin, mouth crowded with narrow teeth that seemed too many for its jaw. Its eyes were bright black stones. A string of beetle shells crossed one shoulder, clicking a faint rhythm when it moved. It sniffed the air, fingers flexing and curling, then turned toward the grass where the rat had gone. Ethan shifted slightly. The cloak brushed his calf. His palm found the dagger's hilt, the small axe steadying him. The creature froze and turned, fixing him with that sharp black gaze. For a long breath, they regarded each other across the ruts of the road. The thing worked its mouth once, showing teeth in a brief flash that felt more like opinion than threat. Its nostrils flared. It lifted a hand, tasting his scent from the air. He did not draw the blade. He took a slow step forward. The word arrived in his mind without invitation, imp. The name fit the sound of the beetle shells, the cunning tilt of its head. The imp hissed, made a rude noise with its lips, and sprang backward into the hedge. Leaves rattled, then stillness. The faint click of beetles was the last of it, swallowed by the forest. Ethan exhaled, and felt the corner of his mouth twist. Imps. Sure. His voice sounded foreign here, but the sound of it warmed something inside him. He glanced toward the grass where the rat had disappeared and saw only stillness returning to itself. Predator and prey gone. The road indifferent. He moved on. The path rose between slender birch whose white trunks watched the light through narrow eyes of black bark. Wind moved through the leaves, turning their undersides to flashes of silver. The shimmer brushed through him. The forest felt awake in a way that carried order, not danger. There were rules here. He could not speak them yet, but he could feel them. A shadow crossed the road, swift as a hand dimming a candle. He lifted his eyes. At first there was nothing, only the lattice of branches and the light filtering between them. Then the shape revealed itself, clinging where two limbs met in a narrow V. Wings folded like leather sails against a chest no larger than both his fists. Fur lay sleek where membrane met body, dark as bark after rain. A tail the length of the creature's form wrapped around the branch and unwrapped again, its tip curling in the air like a question written and erased. The eyes were wrong for any bat, round, forward set, iris a deep molten gold that caught the road and the man upon it without blinking. It clicked once with its tongue. The sound was small but threaded straight through his ribs, as if the body itself were an instrument. Ethan lifted one palm open and kept the other resting on the dagger, habit rather than intent. The creature tilted its head, studying him. He felt again the sensation of being recorded, his presence added to a tally. It turned slightly to show the faint scars edging one wing, 3 thin crescents that glimmered like healed script. Then it leaned forward and was gone, a slice of shadow that melted into leaves. No wind brushed his cheek. No sound marked its fall. He breathed. The cloak stirred softly. He walked on, letting the encounter settle beside the new lexicon of birds. The woods were full of eyes. Some hunted, some simply kept count. The difference mattered. The road dipped. Fresh prints marked the damp ground. He crouched. Hoofprints, a day old. Beside them, narrow tracks with 4 long toes, heron-like though far from water. Along the edge, a line of tiny hand marks, 5 fingers spread like twigs. Imps again. The trail vanished into sedge. He let the story stop where it ended. The strange did not arrive as spectacle. It folded into the ordinary as if it had always been there. A dragonfly carrying a seed in its jaws tumbled against a reed and righted itself without pause. A beetle the size of his thumb dragged a splinter of green glass across the road, flashing once before the color dulled. A vine coiled around a birch, its thorns hooked both directions, as though the plant mistrusted tomorrow's gravity. He left it alone. Ahead, the trees bent away from a small clearing the size of a wagon bed. The earth there was pale and hard-packed. A ring of stones bordered the space, each blackened on its inner face. No ash remained. Only the memory of fire marked in char. Ethan crouched and set his fingers against one of the stones. A faint pulse moved beneath his skin, not heat but residue, the echo of use. Others had paused here before him and gone on. The thought arrived as certainty. He rose and continued forward. A sound brushed through the brush to his right. Not small this time. Something heavier moved, careful with its weight. He turned only his head. Between the leaves, an eye met his, deep brown ringed in pale amber. A line of whisker, a narrow snout striped like bark and shadow. Not predator. Not yet. The creature blinked once and withdrew. The branches closed gently behind it. The message was clear enough. Pass through. Disturb nothing you do not have to. He moved on. A few bends later came the patter of quick steps behind him. He pivoted just as the rat darted past again, its head tilted as if glancing back at pursuit. The imp burst from the brush in full chase. Elbows flared, mouth open wide for breath. It saw Ethan, skidded hard, nearly fell, beetle shells clattering until its hand shot up to silence them. It glared with theatrical fury, chest heaving, and spat a string of sharp clicks that might have been curses. Ethan lifted 2 fingers in a lazy salute. Your problem, not mine. The imp spat once more, hopped in indignation, then vanished into the hedge after the rat. Leaves trembled and stilled. He stood a moment, the ghost of laughter tightening his chest. It was not bravado, not here. It was something else, the mind making space for the impossible without breaking. The road seemed to feel it, to accept the sound. He did too. The trees opened toward a gentle rise where sunlight pooled thicker among the moss. Something pale stood at the crest, half hidden by fern and shadow. Stone, perhaps. He did not hurry. He let the rhythm of his stride carry him forward while the forest watched and the small lives continued their measured work. He knew now that he was being counted. He understood that not every gaze meant danger. Some were only witnesses, marking who had passed and whether they belonged beyond the next turning. He kept walking until the pale shape at the rise sharpened and the road gathered itself to lift him toward it. The pale shape at the crest resolved into a block of stone half sunk in the earth, its top tilted as if the hill had been chewing on it for years. Moss climbed the face in green islands. The edges softened with lichen and ferns grew in the narrow crumble where one corner had split. A birch leaned close on the downhill side, roots gripping the slope, its white bark flaking like old paper. Sun pooled against the stone and made the wet places shine as though the rock had been freshly lifted from a riverbed. Ethan slowed without meaning to. The road bent around the rise and continued, but his steps carried him toward the stone as if the path held a small side intention meant only for him. At arm's length he stopped and let his eyes travel the surface. Scratches first, the kind left by weather and cart wheels, then deeper marks that did not belong to accident. Lines cut with deliberate patience, their edges rounded by rain. They crossed and looped with an order that made his skin tighten. He had seen this language before, not with his eyes but with the nerves beneath them. The circle had worn such marks. The monoliths had held them like veins. He brushed away a patch of moss with the back of his fingers. It came free with the cool scent of damp and soil, leaving a smear of green across his skin. More lines waited underneath, carved by a hand that had known exactly where to press and when to lift. He traced one arc lightly. The stone felt warmer than the air. A bird whistled from the birch and fell silent, as if it too listened. The carvings did not form letters he could read. They gathered in shapes that felt like instructions given to the ground itself. Here a curve nested inside another, both anchored by 3 short strokes. There a set of 4 verticals rose like reeds at the edge of a stream, each capped with a small wedge. Between them ran a diagonal, weaving in and out, notched at intervals like a stitch. He could not translate it, yet he felt its purpose. A boundary described, a distance named, a promise made before promises were counted in coin. He looked up and let the image of the road settle beside the carving in his mind. The ruts matched the diagonal's angle without needing to be measured. The trees ahead parted in deference, as though they remembered that same invisible line. The map in his pocket offered a human sketch of such things. This stone was older, a marker for a road laid for reasons other than trade. He cleared another palm of moss and found a symbol repeated in smaller scale along the lower edge. A loop that did not quite close, interrupted by a tiny square. The circle stones had shown the same mark, glowing faintly when the mist had pressed against them. He had thought it a trick of failing eyes. Yet here, in daylight, with birds and breeze and the taste of clean water still on his tongue, the mark cut through memory and stilled it. The square felt like a held breath, an opening not to be entered, only remembered. He rested his hand on the dagger's hilt, not to draw it, but to steady his thoughts. The metal beneath the leather carried his warmth. For a moment, he imagined that the faint ridges on the hilt echoed the ridges in the stone, that the blade itself spoke a smaller version of this same language. Perhaps someone had known he would find these signs and had given him a companion to recognize them. The thought had no proof, yet it stayed. A line of ants crossed the stone above his hand, moving with perfect purpose. They avoided the cut grooves where they could, bridged them where they must, then disappeared into the moss as though the earth opened to receive them. He watched until the line was gone and wondered how long this marker had stood here, how many seasons of rain and leaf and seed had passed while it kept its single task. He knew only that the task had not changed. He stepped back to take in the whole of it. From a distance, the moss turned the surface into a green map of islands. The split corner became a small inlet. The leaning birch seemed less companion and more guardian. He imagined a long road of such stones laid at intervals wherever the land chose to shift. Most travelers would pass without noticing. They would call their tracks roads and think themselves the first. Yet the old way would still be there beneath theirs, patient, waiting for those who needed more than direction. The thought passed through him with a calm he had not known in days. A breeze rose from the low ground, carrying the scent of crushed mint from somewhere unseen. Leaves on the birch turned their pale undersides and coins of light trembled across the face of the stone. For an instant the carved lines answered, not with brightness, but with a subtle sheen that made them easier to follow. The air changed and then relaxed again, like a muscle that had flexed and settled. He stood still until the sense of motion within the unmoving faded. When he knelt and placed both hands flat at the base, the earth gave a small answering pulse beneath his palms. Not a sound, not even a touch, but a certainty, like knowing a river runs under a field even when you cannot see it. He left his hands there a little longer, then wiped them on his trousers. Green half-moon stains marked the cloth. One day, he thought, a cart would pass, and its driver would not spare this stone a glance. A traveler might touch it in passing and carry the echo in his palm. A child might climb it to leap for courage before friends. He could imagine all of it, and none of it lessened what stood here. This was a word said in the land, and the land kept reading it whether people chose to or not. He walked once around it. The far side faced the slope, its markings fewer, as though the stone had turned its clear face toward those arriving from his direction. Near the base, half hidden by fern, he found a small carving of an arrow with two tails. The ends were notched like feathers, but the point was blunt, as if its intent had never been to pierce. Direction without harm, guidance instead of threat. He cleared the fern gently and let it settle back when he had seen enough. He rested against the birch for a while. The bark caught his shirt in soft curls. He drank from the stream bottle, letting the water cool behind his tongue before he swallowed. He did not try to force meaning into the marks. He let them rest beside his questions, another weight he would carry until understanding arrived or revealed itself as something that had always been at his feet. Before he left, he set his right palm flat on the stone once more. Not prayer, not oath, a promise without words. The rock took his touch and offered nothing back that another would have called an answer. Still, he knew he would not forget the feel of it, the slick damp, the fine grit beneath his fingers, the steady pulse from below, as though the hill itself had a spine and he had pressed his hand against it. He stepped down to the road again. The world resumed the small business it had paused to hear. A wren rattled in the hedge. The stream stitched its quiet music through the ditch. He adjusted the cloak where it had slipped, set the dagger more comfortably at his side, and took a last look at the stone. From this distance, it was ordinary again, a fallen block, a trick of light, a resting place for a tired man. He moved on. The road curved and gathered him, the birch and the marker vanishing behind a screen of leaves. Still he felt them at his back, a steady line drawn on a map he could not yet see, a mark that told him he was not walking at random, but along a way laid down by hands that had known where the ground was safe and where it was not. The thought followed him into the next stretch, and his step grew lighter. The land had spoken once. It would speak again when the time was right. The road folded down into a shallow hollow where the sun could not quite reach. Alder and thorn leaned together until their branches made a net, and the air cooled by a few careful degrees. Ethan felt the change first along his forearms, a prickle that did not belong to breeze. He slowed. Gravel ticked softly beneath his soles, and then stilled. Birdsong clipped short. Leaves held their breath. The stream he had been hearing thinned to a thread. He lifted his eyes along the line of the road and kept the rest of his body still. The cloak settled against his calves. His hand found the dagger's hilt and rested there. He did not draw. A shape unstitched itself from the hedge on his right. It came low and long, a body made for running open ground and turning through tight spaces without losing speed. Legs too long for a common wolf, joints working with a quiet elasticity that let it slide rather than step. Fur patchy where old scars had thinned it, the color of bark and ash. Its mouth opened on teeth that had grown crowded and sharp, each one a different length as though the creature had been built out of many animals and kept the meanest part of all of them. The eyes were silver, not gray, and they caught the filtered light as if it had been made for them. It did not rush him. It took 2 slow paces into the road and set itself at an angle, head low, shoulders high, tail carried like a question waiting for the first wrong move. Then it began to circle. Ethan turned to keep it in front of him, one foot sliding back to set a line between them. He worked the cloak free from his legs with a small shift so the hem would not tangle if he moved. His palm left the hilt and then returned. The leather's worn ridges answered the pressure of his hand. The feel steadied him. The animal carried a thin, sour note that cut through the hollow's cool air. It laid its ears flat for a breath, then raised them again, tasting him with the long muscles of its nose. Its tongue passed over the crowded teeth, leaving a thread of spit that dropped and vanished into dust. It moved left and right, testing for slack in his attention, for the place where fear opens a path. He did not give it that place. He kept the shoulder of a birch at his back, the trunk a half step away, a simple fact that would break a charge and force it to choose a side. He breathed once through his nose and let the breath go. The eyes did not blink. The circle drew smaller by a hand's width. Paws set light, claws leaving hooked commas in the dust. The head lowered until the nose nearly brushed the ground, the spine rising in an arc that promised spring. The mouth closed. That single change pressed more tension into the space between them than a growl could have. Ethan drew the dagger. He made no show of it. Steel cleared the sheath in one clean line and stopped above his hip, point angled toward the creature's throat, edge turned slightly in. His weight shifted forward onto the ball of his front foot. He could feel his heartbeat in his wrists, steady and present. The air changed. It did not move. It gathered. Something brushed the hollow as though a crowd had leaned in without bodies. A thread of sound unfolded, too thin for hearing, too near for wind. It spoke in syllables older than speech, a handful of notes placed inside his bones rather than in his ear. He did not know the tongue, yet the meaning pulled tight between his shoulders. Not command, not prayer, a naming. The animal felt it first. Its ears tipped back. The pupils shrank until the silver filled almost the whole eye. One forepaw lifted and set again in the same place. The circle stopped shrinking. The thread continued for a heartbeat more, then drew inward and was gone, like water finding a seam in stone. The hilt under his fingers was cool and dry. The blade caught no light. Only the stillness remained, as if the hollow had remembered an old rule and expected it to be kept. The wolf's shape did not commit. It shifted its weight, looked past him to the left and then to the right, testing whether he obeyed that same rule. He turned with it, keeping the point in line. The tail lowered. The head lifted slightly from its crouch. Not submission, calculation. It took 2 steps back, not clumsy, not afraid, only measured. It showed its teeth again, but the display felt thinner now, a tool being put away. They held there. A single long breath stretched across 20 paces of beaten earth. Ethan did not lower the blade. He did not speak. The creature's ribs worked once, twice. The sour scent changed, more panic than hunger now. The smell of an animal that has met something it cannot understand and would rather not learn by trying. It backed another step and eased toward the hedge it had used as a door. Leaves brushed its shoulder. The eyes did not leave him. He kept the line. The cloak hung quiet against his calves. A fly crossed the space between them and changed nothing. It withdrew into green. Not in a scramble, but with care. The plants closed behind it. The last thing to vanish was the silver, a thin seam of reflected light that slid sideways and went out. After that, the hollow held its breath, waiting to see if someone would call the moment back and alter its ending. Ethan stood until the birds remembered their work. The first call came from behind him, a tentative 3-note quiver, then another from high in the alder. The stream widened its sound. He let the point drop an inch. He kept the dagger out until the tremor left his hands, then lowered it and slid it home. The leather took the blade with the soft sound of something that had done this 1,000 times. He walked the circle the animal had traced, slow and careful, reading what the ground would tell him. Each print showed a long pad and claws that had not sunk deep. Light feet on alert, not a chase. The marks of the forepaws bit deeper than the rear, meaning it had been ready to spring and had chosen not to. He found one print where the track overlapped itself. The soil there held a little more moisture, and his finger came away with a faint smear. He smelled iron and old leaves. He wiped his hand on the edge of the cloak and crouched by the birch where he had set his back. The bark had pressed a small pattern into his sleeve. The detail pleased him in a way he could not name. At the edge of the road, a tuft of fur hung from a thorn. He pinched it free and turned it between finger and thumb. Coarse, two-toned, ash and brown, each hair banded like a shell. He tucked it into a pocket without knowing why and stood. He looked into the hedge where the creature had gone and did not try to pierce the green. Whatever had measured him had taken its answer and moved on. He let that be enough. He checked the sun's angle, then the lay of the road, and began to walk. The hollow released him without protest. As he climbed out of the dip, the trees thinned and light found his shoulders again. Birds scolded one another over a patch of berries. A dragonfly wrote quick angles above the ditch. The world resumed its patient labor. He went on until the sense of being watched eased, and only then did he let his thoughts return to the sound that had passed through him. It had not been imagination. It had not been fear giving shape to nothing. The blade had been in his hand when it began, and it had been quiet when it ended. He did not decide what that meant. He carried the question forward until the road offered a better place to set it down. The hollow slid behind him, and light settled over the road in thin layers. He walked until his breath forgot its tightness and the tremor in his hands eased. The world returned to its errands. Then it adjusted to his. At first it could have been nothing. A vole burst from the ditch, crossed the ruts in one quick decision, and vanished into sedge. Birdsong thinned as he neared a pocket of alder. Notes that had stitched the canopy neatly together closed upon themselves, as if a hand had pressed them flat. When he stepped forward, the hush followed for several strides before releasing him to the sound behind. At the stream, a scatter of small fish held in the current beside his boot. He bent to fill the waterskin. His shadow brushed them, and still they held. When his fingers touched the surface, the school tore away as though a hidden cord had snapped, a single pattern flung downstream that dissolved at once. He straightened, and a cold certainty settled beneath his ribs like something placed deliberately there. Wind moved left to right, clean and even. Whatever scent clung to him should have drifted off the path, yet a hare on the far bank lifted its head, tasted the air, stamped once, and vanished under bracken without sound. Resin and clay rode the breeze. No iron, no rot. The unease belonged to everything else. He walked on, and the change sharpened. Pale butterflies lifted from flowers, turned toward him, then folded and scattered as one body. Ants split around his boot, as if he were a coal placed in their path. A jay cut off a stolen melody mid-phrase and melted into green. The forest seemed to press two fingers to its own throat. He thought of the thread of sound in the hollow. Not music, not speech, but a line drawn through him and pulled away, leaving a taste like rain on iron. The dagger had been in his hand when it came. Where the road widened to hard, bright soil, he stopped. Sun warmed the damp edge of the cloak. The waterskin hung heavy at his hip. He listened until the brush recovered its breath, then set the waterskin down and decided what he meant to learn. He eased the dagger free and held it low beside his thigh. The steel carried no shine. The circle around him quieted by slow degrees. A spiderweb between two blades of grass took a faint quiver that owed nothing to the breeze. He placed the blade on a flat stone by the ditch and stepped back 3 paces. The world exhaled. A wren sprang up, scolded as though a boundary had been restored, and hopped toward crumbs he had not seen. A bee sank into a white flower and went about its work. The stream recovered its murmur. He counted to 30. The woods kept pace with the count. He stepped forward again, closed his fingers on the hilt, and felt the air draw tight. The way a room remembers it has a door. The wren broke off its chatter and stared. The bee drifted too. Another bloom, its path shifted slightly, as if fences had moved. The web trembled once, then stilled. He set the blade down. Life resumed. He tried again to be sure. Hand on steel, and the circle tightened. Hand off, and it opened. Cause or companion? He could not tell. He suspected both truths pointed toward the same place. He slid the blade home. The woods accepted this without ceremony. A thrush began to sing again, question and answer, the answer turning once at the end so that it felt like laughter. A lizard darted from one warm stone to another. A leaf let go and spun 3 times before finding the road. Nothing came closer than it needed to. Fear thinned into something nearer to regard. He walked and watched how the small citizens of the forest adjusted to him. Nothing that fed on seed or clover allowed him close. Even a heavy-wood pigeon, a bird that trusted indifference as its armor, lifted from its perch, took a wide circle, and settled deeper in the green. He noted the measure of that distance and understood that it would not narrow while he remained in sight. The difference lived inside him as well. His attention placed itself without effort. He tracked 3 sounds at once and knew which belonged to stone, which to leaf, and which to something that was neither. He felt where hooves had turned the ground yesterday. When he stood still, he could sense the faint pulse of a large body breathing beyond the hedge. Not threat, only presence. When he moved again, his feet found the firmer ground without thought. His shadow shifted no shape, yet he felt taller within it. At a bend where the road widened to sand, he crossed at an angle and looked back. His prints were clear. No other track crossed them. The trails of animals ran parallel and refused to step over. He crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the nearest impression. The sand was still moist. The shape held cleanly. He wiped the grit on his trousers and rose with the quiet certainty that the day had placed a sign upon him and the sign would travel. He did not know which tale claimed it. He did not know whether the forest had set its mark or whether the blade had written its own law upon him. He knew only that prey no longer named him, and whatever hunted would weigh him on a different scale than it had given him in the night. The thought did not comfort him. It steadied him. A breath of cloud slid across the sun and let the air cool. He lifted the water skin and drank. The water carried the taste of stone and cedar, bright and clean. He looped the strap beneath the cloak and walked. Ahead, the trees parted by small degrees, and a long stripe of open land appeared where fields might begin. The breeze that came down that corridor carried a low note beneath the others, rolling under birds and stream. It might have been the earth speaking to itself. It might have been distance learning his name. He did not choose between them. He moved toward it with the mark he had been given and let the day discover what that meant, step by step beside him. Open country arrived by degrees. Trees loosened their grip on the sky, hedges took their place, and rough fields patched themselves on both sides of the road. Skylarks stitched thin music high above. Bees moved the hedges with quiet industry. He felt the forest behind him like deep water after a long swim, its weight still clinging to his skin, and let the open land set his pace. The sound came as pressure first, a pause that gathered inside his chest. Then the howl rose. It was not the wolf thing from the hollow. It came from farther than the next bend, broader and older, a low beam groaning in a settling house. A single bell allowed to speak its whole breath. It climbed without haste, held, then fell like river water spilling over stone. Birdsong cut off. The larks unraveled into silence. The bees kept working but drifted by slow degrees away from the road, as if the hedge itself had begun to breathe inward. Ethan stood and let the sound pass through cloth and bone. His hand found the dagger and rested there. He did not draw. The weight beneath his palm felt like a spoken name. The howl came again, a second line beside the first, thinner at the beginning and darker at the end. It slid beneath the hedges and down the spine of the road until he felt it in his feet. No chase followed. The silence that came after carried notice rather than hunger. He passed a gate of weathered posts and a slat door tied with rope. 5 high score marks, a gap, then 5 more. Above them 3 iron nails and a bundle of dried herbs bound with hair. The meaning was clear. Pass with respect. He did not touch the gate. Air came warm from the open stretch ahead, smelling of dust and sun and the faint tin taste that lingers after storms. He drank from the water skin and waited until his breath matched the slower rhythm of the land. The howl sounded once more, far off and lower now, like something vast turning in its sleep. Near his boot, a line of ants turned as one and chose a new path. A kestrel abandoned its hover and slipped away. The hedge made a soft rattling that was leaf on leaf, attention moving through touch. He thought of the thread of sound that had passed through him in the hollow. That had been close and precise. This was weather wearing the shape of a voice. He could not tell if it belonged to a throat or to a place that had learned to sing. The urge to crouch and hide rose and passed. This was not warning. It was a bell marking a time. Somewhere, something ancient had noted that a line had been crossed. The road bent around a short wall painted in pale coins of lichen. Beneath an elder's shade, a single upright slab stood alone, as though it had forgotten its partner. 3 arcs of claw marks scored the stone's face, too high for dog, too wide for the beast that had circled him. He placed his palm below the scars and felt deep rock chill. When he lifted his hand, only damp remained. He listened again. The howl faded to memory, then to a vibration he might not have noticed an hour before. He imagined it moving through the underways of the land, along seams of water and through root and old stone, carrying news the way sap carries spring. The thought felt less like comfort than explanation. He walked. The road climbed and fell. A tight flock of small sheep bunched and loosened as if a current had passed through them. A boy stood by a gate, a stick in his hand. His dog did not bark. It opened one eye, looked at Ethan, then turned its head, a quiet lesson in manners learned from something older than training. The sun slipped behind a slow cloud and lit its rim like hammered silver. For a breath the world appeared poured from one metal. The howl did not rise again. Its absence had a presence of its own, like the space in a song where the singer draws breath and the room waits without knowing why. Hedge, field and pale road ran forward in long quiet. He gave himself to the labor of travel. Counting steps lasted until the next marker and then fell away. Rhythm gathered him and carried him without effort. At a shallow notch he turned once. The tree lean behind lay dark against the light. A rook called and dropped into a glide. He adjusted the waterskin strap, checked the set of the blade at his hip, and faced forward. He did not know which old thing had raised its voice or what law it spoke, only that the land had heard and that he had been included in the hearing. That inclusion felt like cost and permission at once. He accepted both and followed the road into the last of the open strips, where the ground leveled for a long mile and did not look back.
The next chapter of this novel will be posted on my YouTube channel. My other books are available on Amazon Kindle. Thank you.